welcome Scott and Patricia and Don and Alice and Susan. The names keep changing around my screen. I'm trying to get everybody, and hopefully I am getting everyone. We'll probably start in a minute or two. This can be as much of a discussion as we want it to be, so we want to allow this to have time for discussion. This is our monthly meeting of the Combined Jewish Earth Alliance and Pennsylvania IPL. And this month we're trying to get more people to help us out making comments to EPA on the carbon rule. And we're going to be talking about how easy it is. People make it so easy to do, but as we're welcoming people in, I'm going to do a reading so that we'll have as much time as we possibly can. I'll wait for Bruce to connect and welcome Susan. Okay, there's Bruce. Welcome, Bruce. All right, this is a reading. It's from Rabbi David Shmuley Yanalowitz, and she's talking about something she calls global religion. And this is really an interfaith encounter. She says, what we need to do in religion is to collaborate to become as established as the primary means to move forward in this world to help us move toward repair and healing. And then Sir David Attenborough, the noted naturalist, commented, right now we are facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years. And that's climate change.
Anybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up.
If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinctions of much of the natural world is on the horizon. If we do nothing, if we stay in our own corners, then it is to our own peril. So to all of us tonight who don't know where to begin in this enormous, vast change, I want to say, we must come together to have more meaningful interreligious dialogues about climate change. We need to bring about change. Our worlds need this change urgently. The ability to create this change will heal humanity. I have found that the most helpful way to carve out time for environmental activism, while there are so many other demands in our lives, is to make very small but consistent changes in one's daily habits. Though it may be difficult, I try to remind myself every day of how much I love my children, my grandchildren, and other people who are younger than myself, and how badly I want the world to be inhabitable for them. We cannot wait for change. We must be the change. And all of you who are here tonight are part of the change because you want to learn how to make changes and promoting change by way of being an activist with EPA. So I'm welcoming all of you, and I want to turn the program over to Seth Sachs, who is the Field Director of Climate Action Pennsylvania. That's a project of the Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. And he will speak on the significance of the carbon rule for power plants and how to leave comments, take actions, how to write letters to the editor. The EPA has proposed new standards to cut carbon pollution from power plants. The EPA is now taking public comment on their proposal, and they do listen to comments. They really are important to them. And we're running out of the time to make comments, so we're going to ask you to raise your voice tonight in a way that's very easy. It matters, and it will hold the administration accountable. So Seth, take it away. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Phyllis. And thank you everybody for allowing me to join your meeting tonight. It's great to be with you. As Phyllis mentioned, my name is Seth Sachs. I'm the field director for the Climate Action Pennsylvania program. We are a small field team operating in Southeast Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Delaware County, working close with our partners, as Phyllis mentioned, including sitting on a state table with our friends IPL. I'm here to talk about carbon tonight. I know it's a very exciting topic, but it is vital that as many people are voicing their, submitting their comments as possible. We're going to talk a bit about the rule, a bit about how it plays into the larger strategy of hitting our emission targets. And I know that you all have some great ways to take action, such as a Google sign-on form and submitting LTEs and things like that. So I'm happy to jump in. The way we've been kind of looking at it is we see kind of like three big buckets for really bold structural change, right? The one big one that I'm sure everybody has been talking about to death is the Inflation Reduction Act, or the Affordable Clean Energy Plan. That is absolutely massive. Another one is all the great work being done on the state level. Of course, we can't be disregarding that. We can't put all our hope in that, but it's of course a big way in which we can drastically reduce our emissions. Some 40% of people in the US now live in places that are committed to 100% clean power. And the third big one is the suite of federal safeguards, which very much complement each other and are very much a way that working in tandem, in conjunction, that we can properly address our emission targets. So there are a whole suite of federal safeguards put forth by the EPA with open comment periods. Maybe people remember working on soot or fine particulate matter. That was earlier this year. Of course, heavy duty vehicles was last year. The Good Neighbor Rule, also known as the Cross-State Air Pollution, or CSAPR, which was closed last year and is actually now under attack by the GOP through the Congressional Review Act, which is another issue that we could talk about, of course. Ozone is coming up this fall. That's another really big one that we have our eye on. It's a very important federal safeguard where we really need people to be weighing in. But right now we can talk about the carbon rule. We see this as the #1 federal safeguard of this year where we can drastically reduce our emissions. We see it as very much like the low-hanging fruit of being able to come in and drastically reduce this power sector that has been virtually unchecked and rules have not been updated since the 70s. So of all those past and upcoming ones, we feel like this is the big one. And we think that this one does close on August 8th. So we do not have all that much time to be taking action. It was extended to August 8th, but that is the last day that we can be submitting comments. I bet as many people know on this call, our power sector is one of the largest sources of climate pollution, but yet is virtually unchecked. And the EPA has an obligation under the Clean Air Act to set and effectively enforce limits on carbon pollution from new and existing power plants, new and existing gas and coal-fired power plants. Open comment periods are really a key time, as I'm sure many people know, and as Phyllis mentioned, for communities to really be making their voices heard and empower the EPA with the support to put forth the strongest possible standards. The more outcry of people from communities saying we need the strongest possible standards, the more they feel emboldened to really put those standards in place. With the carbon emissions rule currently proposed, we have the possibility of cutting down the second largest sector of climate emissions in the country by 90%. So that is massive. That is 617 million metric tons of pollution cut out from what would be released into the atmosphere, which really is the equivalent of about half of all cars on the road in the US. So this is a massive stride in working towards a clean energy economy, hitting our 50% reductions by 2030, and building that clean energy economy that we all want and need so badly for future generations. So as this proposal moves forward, we've been urging the EPA to finalize the strongest possible standards by early next year, ensure that they are in line with the emission reductions necessary to meet the challenges of the climate crisis, and really ensure that these are shaped by communities, right? The open comment period is a really key time for communities to be weighing in. Of course, disadvantaged communities, communities of color are often the hardest hit and most overburdened by these rules. So it's really essential that we are getting as much outpour and support as possible. And that includes all kinds of different ways to take action so that we can really make sure that the EPA does come out with the strongest possible standard. If it's half measures, if it doesn't go all the way, if it doesn't really properly address these things, then we feel like this comment period is a really missed opportunity to be properly addressing these issues. So we feel that really the EPA should be using every tool in the toolbox, right? There are lots of other safeguards that they've been proposing, but we really want to ensure that these rules are implemented with an eye towards minimizing any negative economic impacts on workers and communities, and helping them both prepare and benefit from the nation's energy transition. This very much feels like a big opportunity, right? Every crisis is an opportunity, in my opinion. And yes, we need to be properly addressing this crisis, but we also have the potential to be rebuilding in a better, more resilient, more equitable way. So I think this is a really key time for us to be putting that forward and making our voices heard. So a few quick action items. I know Renica has a Google form, which I'm happy to put in the chat. It's a really great way to make your voice heard to the EPA. LTEs are another great way to make our voices heard. We had one published earlier this year, about a month ago. It's a really great way to encourage others to get out there, to submit their public comment, to encourage their friends and family and loved ones to be doing the same. Another big one is really to be staying engaged on this and seeing what it turns into maybe next year, right? There are always attacks on these things, such as what we're seeing right now in the Senate from the GOP with the CRA on the good neighbor rule. There may be attacks on this down the line, and we want to make sure that when we get a really good standard passed, that we also playing the defense and making sure that there aren't strong attacks and these things aren't being stripped away. And another one, of course, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but keeping an eye for future regulations that are coming out of the EPA. I mentioned ozone, that's going to be another big one, but we really do feel that the carbon rule is the big one, and we don't have much time to submit our comments. So I'd encourage everyone to be filling out the Google form, maybe writing an LTE, learning more about the issue. I also have the Federal Registrar link if people want additional language, and making sure that we are hand in hand, all hands on deck, as many comments as possible so that we can get the strongest community-led solutions to the climate crisis through this carbon rule. So that's kind of my overall view. I'm happy to pause, share resources, answer any questions people might have.
Floor is open for questions.
I don't see a Google form in the chat yet that we can work on.
Coming right up.
Do we punch on this now and fill it out? Or is it
Yes,
something we do later?
it's something we can do now, correct, Renita?
Yes, yeah, you can do that now.
So why don't we pause? Unless we have questions, why don't we all open up that Google form, fill it out, and if you have questions, we can be happy to answer the questions.
I'll also share a copy. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you. A copy of our published LTE if anyone would like to see that as well.
So even though it says submit a comment to EPA, in this case, we really don't have to write something. You can, if you want, and you can submit a comment independently, like write your own materials. But this is so easy that everybody can do it in the next 2 minutes. So I'm going to be quiet and start typing. And if you can't access the form now, we'll be sending out the links later. Are people done? Good. So anybody have any questions about why we're going through the exercises? How much does this matter? How much does the EPA really look at petitions like this, or letters, or comments?
I'm a retired geologist, and most of my expertise is in the ground and not in the air. So I find it difficult to understand all of the technical aspects of this, but I certainly understand the history of climate change. But I was very upset about the attack on the Clean Water Act and the rolling back of protections of wetlands and so forth. And I just worry that along the lines of the Congressional Review Act, that these regulations, if passed, and if the strict standards are approved or final, that it's going to end up at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to end up rolling stuff back. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do what we're doing. By all means, we should be doing what we're doing. I mean, I've in Pennsylvania, I've been very active in writing in favor of the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And as far as I know, we've gotten very close to that being in place. I'd love to see it over the goal line, but I think I just worry about the activist Supreme Court that we have.
Beth, perhaps you can comment how these standards were developed in light of the recent Supreme Court rulings, and how we think that we might be in legal okay land, but we never know.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I think those are really valid concerns, and I think there's a lot to be scared about with the Supreme Court. But I really do think that, as Phyllis mentioned, the West Virginia versus EPA, that very much was about regulating emissions from power plants, right? And this proposed rule will go in a really great direction on addressing that, and will not counteract, but it is a good way for us to really be reducing those emissions, even though the Supreme Court wanted the EPA to have less ability to be doing so. So I do think that there are good workarounds. And I think also that you mentioned RGGI, that is a fantastic program. I really hope that it does go our way in the courts. But if this carbon rule were to pass, each state would have their own way of ensuring that certain emission reductions targets are hit. And RGGI could be a really key component of that for states to make sure that their regulations are reduced in a way that are hitting those standards. So especially if the funds end up in something like a RGGI Investment Act. So it's really important that those funds are going to the correct places. But I think that might encourage more states to join RGGI, right? PA would the 12th state, PA would be the 12th state or 13th. I always get those numbers off, but there's not a lot of states currently in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And I think that's a really important thing for more states to be joining. And I would hope that this EPA regulatory safeguard would help and encourage more states to do so.
Bruce?
Yeah, I'll just say I've done a lot of work on RGGI also, particularly with my relatively new Democratic Senator, John Kane, who initially came into office opposed to RGGI, but has very solidly swung around. I also, I know that right now, in addition to RGGI, probably the biggest issue in Pennsylvania is the alternative energy portfolio standards. And I mean, I could explain that, but Seth, you can probably explain that better. And I know that the governor, Shapiro, is really pushing this. He sees this as central. And I think that we need to really support that. Seth, do you want to comment?
No, I completely agree with you. And there are some potential directions that I think are good to be avoiding. I know hydrogen has come up a lot, for example, in the state of Pennsylvania. And, you know, there's a lot of, I don't want to say pitfalls, but areas to be extremely cautious about, and probably not the best direction we can be going and things like that. So I think it's really important that we are dissecting those different plans being put forth, supporting them when they look good, supporting components that really will work to make us a clean energy state. As you probably know, only about 3% of power in PA comes from clean energy. So there's a lot of room to be, you know, a lot of strides to make, right? A lot of progress to make. And I think that's a really key area to be looking at.
I'm going to be reposting for those of you who either got kicked off or who came in a little bit late, the request that we have, which is to submit a comment to the EPA. So I will be doing that in a minute. Anybody else have any questions? Patricia, I'm sorry, my eyes were down.
I guess my concerns about the issue are that even if the EPA comes out with good regulations, they aren't going to have set out enough personnel to actually enforce them. That if anything, all they're going to do is fine the companies who are going to say, oh, it's just a cost of business, and raise our rates in order to pay for it, and that nothing is going to happen. Like to see something happen. But I have my doubts in Pennsylvania.
I think that's a fair concern, especially whenever there's like federal regulations passed down, and then it's up to the states to really enforce those. But I do see, you know, with good regulation from the federal standard, and then of course a good rollout in the state. That's another thing to be pushing on, is a solid rollout in the state, and having things like RGGI in place, I think would go a long way. But I agree that there are some potential pitfalls there as well. But I think that this will have strong impacts on PA and as a whole, and each state will kind of learn from others and be able to you know, put forth infrastructure to really make that transition. So I hear you on the hesitancy of if there's sufficient personnel there, but I think if we have enough public pressure on the state and local governments to be enforcing these regulations, that they can really make a difference as well. That's a good concern, though. I appreciate that.
Is your concern about at the state EPA level or the federal EPA level, Patricia? Or both?
Both. I know Penn Future was saying a while back that 95% of our politicians are so paid for the fossil fuel companies that they're not going to do a damn thing to help us. So I wish us luck.
That's a cause for concern too. Absolutely. That's why we need that legislative accountability, you know.
So I attended a seminar on how you submit public comments, where you actually make testimonies, or you write a comment, which is your own, you know, a handwritten type of paper type of thing. And I was told that the EPA, somebody in the EPA has to read every single comment that's submitted. So if there's thousands and thousands of comments, and then they have the job of summarizing them. So it really does matter. They summarize them in terms of numbers, and then they summarize it in terms of the particularly salient comments. So it really does matter. Seth is shaking his head. Yes, that's true.
Yes, they do have to read each and every one of them. So the more you can share your story, I think that's a really big one. When there are hearings that come around, those go a long way. Those passed recently, but really ensuring that your comment is, I don't know, heartfelt as well, if you are submitting them directly. goes a long way. And they do compile those, they do look at those, and it can make a difference in the final rulings.
Paul, I'm going to call on you in a second. Yeah, actually, I'll call you on you now, and then I'll go back and ask Seth a question.
Yeah, my question is, can you say anything about the technique that might be used to lower the carbon from these plants?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this would go into effect for new new gas power plants and new and existing coal power plants, right? But we don't see coal as being a real issue in PA, considering that there's no new ones really coming online and a lot of them are coming off board, right? So it's more about the gas powered plants. You do see this talk of carbon capture, which for many fossil fuel companies, you may know, is a non-starter. It's a way to continue pollution as usual. So there are a host of different ways in which we could be doing this, including, retrofitting existing gas power plants, or when we build new ones, having them just highly efficient as well. So bring it back to Reggie, right? If we're ensuring that they have to pay that price and that the emission standards are set, then they're going to be either retrofitting or building from anew in a different way that is more efficient with less emission output. So it's really essential that we really be tackling these things and not be relying just on carbon capture, which, as you all know, is fossil fuel talk for more of the same. So that's one of the things that we should be looking out for when people do talk about that.
Can you elaborate a little bit on other ways that might be legitimate for them to be cleaning up their power plants?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think it's a bit more of a technical question that I could pull up more resources on and share after this. Because I've been looking at a few, but some of the ones that I've been seeing are, talk about carbon capture, and I think that is problematic. So I'd be happy to share some more resources after this meeting.
Of course, the best way is to get the gas companies not to be producing gas in their power plants and to convert to clean energy ones. And it's surprising how many fossil fuel companies are now doing clean energy projects. Shell is diversifying their portfolio quite a bit, and is now selling clean energy. Other questions or comments? Bruce.
So I'm very active with Quakers in this area, and about 5 of us recently created a 501c4 so that we can be more active in working on legislation and policy issues. We have a small list now, but we're very anxious to build that list. So first of all, anybody who wants to get on it, you don't have to be Quaker. We're called Quaker Action Mid-Atlantic Region, or QAMAR for short. We just created our website a couple of weeks ago, so don't look for something really flashy. But if you're interested in getting on it, we expect to send out alerts quite regularly, and we're getting the software that makes it easy for people to use. That is, you can put in your address and zip code, and it'll automatically know who your state rep and your state senator are, and can send a message. So that's an invitation. I think that we should send out an alert about this ASAP, getting comments into the EPA on the carbon rules. And Seth, it would help to have for us to start with a pre-packaged or written alert about that. What's the best one to use? I mean, you put up the one on the Google forum, and you've put up an LTE. I still don't know what an LTE stands for, by the way, but
Letter to the editor, I'm sorry.
What is it?
Letter to the editor.
Oh,
So
letter to the editor. Oh, okay.
published in the Philadelphia Daily News. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, if you have a suggestion or if you have something else that would be really good to use in getting an alert out to our growing constituency, that would be terrific.
Yeah, my apologies for not spelling out a letter to the editor earlier. I use so many acronyms every day. But no, that's great, and it's really great to hear that. I think I'd refer you to the Google form that we shared from Redika. There's some good language in there. If you wanted to create alert, I'll maybe refer to her as well. But I think that's a really good thing to be sharing with any membership you have and
Yep.
Across the board.
So, Redika, why don't you explain how it was developed, how the way that Pennsylvania Power and Light does these things and the kind of impact it'll have, and the more we can elevate it with other groups, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason that this is a Google form is because it really simplifies the process of submitting a comment to the EPA. So there's a section in there where you can actually write your own message where it says use this space to write any personal concerns or comments that you'd like to share with the administration. But if you don't have the time, or you just don't feel like it, you can also submit a comment without writing something, because we've got a standardized comment that Interfaith Power and Light National can submit for you if you're unable to write something, which is a really great thing to have. And what happens then is that we have a way to then upload all of those comments and get them into the EPA. So the work that you've done on this end is a lot simpler than the work that gets done on the back end. So really streamlines the process. And we're just really hoping to have as many voices as possible ask for the strongest possible standards against carbon pollution from fossil fuel power plants. Like Seth explained, we're all stronger together. Every little voice counts. And I think it's important to realize that we are the people that are going to be affected by the decisions made by this administration. I mean, of course, everybody on Earth, we're all living here. But I think that they really need to hear from the people within communities, especially more disadvantaged communities, personal stories and, your personal voices. And the best way to share this is honestly tell your friends, send it in an email, text people see if they'll be willing to submit a comment. And if you need guidance on how to talk to somebody about this, if you need some language, actually at the bottom of the Google form, but I can also link it in the chat here, we have some background information and messaging from the Climate Action Campaign that I think describes the rule and some really good facts about what the rule could accomplish for our health and in faith terms and for environmental justice that you can use when you're sharing this information, and which will probably help contextualize it if you're just learning about this type of thing.
Scott?
I would just say, like Bruce, if you have people who are very technically proficient at the air quality issues involved, can write a personal letter directly through the Federal Register, the comments, they carry more weight than a standard form like the Google form. And yeah, a lot of comments helps, but they need to hear the technical rationale. And I think it's not only the rationale in favor, but if they're knowledgeable about the arguments against, that they shoot those arguments down with technical rationale. That's what the EPA needs to hear. They don't need to hear just, we think we should have these strict standards because it's, it's good for my children and grandchildren, which is kind of what I say. But I dealt with EPA for many years in my career, and I know that in commenting on regulations, it's really important to not only state the reasons why we support this regulation, but we need to also include arguments, identify the basic arguments against by the opponents and shoot those arguments down in the letter. If you have, Bruce, if you have folks in your group who are capable of doing that, that's going to carry more weight than 5 of these Google forms.
And I would extend that from well beyond Bruce to everybody on this call, because anybody who has expertise can write such a letter. And I might actually call on Liz because I know she has a ton of expertise and experience doing these things. If you'd like to comment, please.
So sorry, I'm joining late. I'm just catching on, so I don't really have any comments right now. Thanks.
We're talking about the importance right now of making scientifically based comments to EPA.
Yeah, it's critically important to send comments to EPA, and the little bit that I caught from what Scott was saying, I absolutely agree with.
Liz, this is Bruce. I just told people about Quaker Action, Middle Atlantic region. Liz is like our key person on that. And yeah, you and I should get together to think about what we're doing or what we might do further in terms of getting comments to the EPA.
Just going to poll everybody, either raise your physical hand, or if you're not on camera, raise your reaction hand. How many of you have actually written a personal comment to anybody, either a politician or EPA or anything like that? And if you'd like to share your experience about doing it, Liz, Bruce, Paul, Scott, I have done it. Renica, I know you have. Seth, you have. Sue has, Patricia has, Phyllis has. So we are a bunch of activists on this call. Isn't that wonderful? Anybody want to share a story or something that you think that's particularly helpful or impactful or helping you to get over that very first one or helping you to do it?
Yeah, I think Bruce should share the story. We worked together on a state legislator, and I think it's really important to work to figure out who has experience that can be relevant and in connecting with a legislator, and who's got the locale, who has who is the constituent. So oftentimes constituents. It's really important for us to connect with one another and increase our impact by doing that. So I think that's a great story, Bruce.
Sure. So Liz is talking about the work I did with her and in connecting with Senator Kane, who was elected. I think he was the one Democrat elected in 2020 who replaced a Republican. Ironically, the Republican state senator was pretty much in favor of RGGI. When John came into office, he wasn't. He's a union man. I mean, he spent his life in the plumbers and pipe fitters union, and plumbers and pipe fitters have a lot of jobs in traditional power plants, coal and natural gas and stuff. So he was not inclined to support RGGI, and there was a critical vote in, was it June of, it must have been June of 21, but maybe it was 22, I forget, where he voted the wrong way. anyway, I'm one of his constituents, and I got Liz joined me in having a couple Zoom conversations with him and his staff, and we were very respectful but quite persistent, and a key thing really, well, we just kept coming back, and in the process of that, we really developed a relationship with his staff, and that's really important. We began to kind of figure out that the key person on the staff, or two key people actually, were probably in favor of Reggie with what we were advocating. But of course, they've got to go with the boss. But it was very helpful. So a really key thing happened around about our fourth or fifth conversation with his key legislative aide. Liz mentioned the importance of job training, training people who are negatively impacted by phasing out coal and potentially natural gas powered generating operations. And she noted that Pennsylvania is notoriously bad at providing this kind of training. And the aide asked, well, do you know where we can learn about a good training program? Well, Liz, in her former avatar as director of the, was it energy, I got it right, energy coordinating agency? No, what?
Right, that's correct.
Right. She had helped to create a job training program in Philadelphia for train people, and she can tell you more about that. Anyway, that led to one or two staff people coming to visit that plant or that operation, and they were so enthusiastic they told the senator, "You need to come and take a look at this." Liz, you should just briefly say how he reacted when he came to come. What I'll say to kind of finish the story is, a few weeks later, we were notified that he was on board and he was going to support Reggie. But just say, Liz, because I love how you put this, when Senator Kane came to see that training program.
Yeah, Senator Kane is a very warm and very he's a very real person, and he clearly was a little bit trying to adjust to this big transition in his life from being a union guy to being a legislator, and was having some difficulty with that, and he felt really at home in the training center. We took him on a tour of the ECA training center, and he was completely, at home. He felt, he knew exactly what was going on. He made a lot of jokes, and he was in his element. And so I think he really appreciated the ECA training center. Does a good job of kind of historically referencing, this is the way we used to do it, many years ago, and now we were, and 30 years ago we were doing this. And so it has kind of this historical progression of training. And he, really understood that energy has always been in transition, and we're just in another one of those. So it wasn't, he understood the context immediately, and he was, very, very comfortable. And I think that kind of, I think Bruce's very patient work with him and with his staff, and the very respectful work with his staff. It was revealed, in these meetings, that his staff was really looking for a way to help him connect. And the jobs is absolutely critical, and the training, having excellent technical training for Pennsylvanians to transition is exactly what's needed. And he could own that because he, this is, one of his areas of expertise. So it was a fun, and I think he's been pretty steadfast ever since, right, Bruce?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've just heard from Matt Franchek just in the last week, appreciating something I sent him. Yeah, that he's one of the key staff people in the senator's office. I will say this doesn't always work. I now have a new representative, a Republican representative, Craig Williams. I'm in Delaware County, and man, I've been trying to get through to him, and I've tried everything. I tried going personally to his office, and nobody wants to talk to me. So, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how we might break through. And the line, the line I'm using, which Liz referred to, is, hey, this is happening. This transition is going to happen. It's underway, and Pennsylvania is so far behind. You are not doing your constituents a favor by stonewalling this. And that argument is going to gather force. I mean, we see what's happening now. This summer and stuff. More and more people are gonna get pretty upset about this. So we just got to keep working.
I would just add one point that there are a lot of new legislators, and new legislators are like fresh slates. They're looking really for, how they establish themselves, how they connect. What is it that they're, how is it they're going to, be useful. This is a really critical time in the life of any new legislator to connect with them. And what I've heard broadly from, people who've been in this business their whole lives is that the new legislators tend to be younger. They tend to be more pro-environment, regardless of party. So I think that's really important to understand. I think the older, Republicans that are in place tend to be a little bit more wedded to the fossil fuel industry. And maybe, I don't know this for a fact, but it's possible that younger Republicans are a little less rigid. So I would just keep that in mind as you approach people.
There are direct effects of the increased greenhouse gas and CO2 buildup and methane buildup in the atmosphere in terms of weather that we've been seeing. But there are secondary effects that are coming, and that's sea level rise. Because as the atmosphere heats up, and if our ice shelves are melting and suddenly there's a sudden collapse of an ice shelf, sea level is going to go up, but it's going to go up pretty rapidly, and coastal areas are going to be affected. And it can't be stopped, but it's incumbent upon any communities that have coastal low-lying areas that could be affected by sea level rise to adapt and to be prepared. Some of the larger examples of that are like Venice and Amsterdam and Rotterdam and London have all built seawalls with gates to close when storm surges are coming, and to try to prevent the flooding of lowland areas. But not every community can do that. But we're going to be seeing more and more properties along the coast that are slowly going to become uninsurable because of gradual increase in flooding. And it doesn't have to be in a storm surge from a tropical storm. But most of the models that the Intergovernmental Climate Consortium have used have predicted 4 to 5 feet maximum in this century. But the geological record indicates that in the past, sea level rise has occurred more faster than that. Has actually been higher than we're seeing it now as the glaciers were melting. And if something like that would happen again, it could be a real problem for a lot of coastal communities. There'll be loss of land, and it's a global phenomenon. It's not just the United States. But I think if regulators realize that it's not only the sudden intensity of wildfires and flash floods and intense storms and droughts, but it's also the effect that it's having on our Arctic and the ice shelves and the rate of receding and melting going on in the polar regions, and that can't be stopped, but it can be adapted to, or at least maybe slowed down if we can reduce the rate of melting. Most of the studies I've been following show that the rate of melting is actually faster than we're being predicted by even the best scientists. And all that means is that the risk of a major collapse of an ice shelf in Antarctica or Greenland goes up. And it's not gradual melting. It's the sudden release of all that ice into the ocean basins will cause the water levels to rise, and they'll rise quickly. So, you know, my main point is that when we talk to regulators, the technical folks can also say it's not only the effects on weather that we're concerned about and air quality alerts, you know, particulate matter and so forth, but it's also the effect on sea level rise, which is going to cost billions and multiple billions of dollars to this country and countries around the world. Governments don't have enough money. Even our government doesn't have enough money to handle all of these weather catastrophes. You know, governments can be bankrupted by responding to these catastrophes, and so legislators need to be made aware of these things. It takes a good communicator to do that effectively. Sorry, I'll get off my stump. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate, you know, Seth, I appreciate what you all are doing. Bruce, best of luck to you. And Liz, thank you for you know, your work with Bruce. I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. Have a great night. Nice connecting with you all.